Practical Endgame Techniques by International Master Andrew Martin. Side 1. The object of this tape is to examine endings of practical value. Now there's no doubt in my mind that the ending is the most difficult phase of the chess game to study for the average player, simply because it's beyond the patience of most players to sit down in front of their board, take out only a few of the pieces available to them, and analyse techniques and motifs rather in the way that one would analyse mathematics. For the majority, chess is not like that at all. I've chosen positions for this tape which I consider to be indispensable knowledge for the average club player. They have also been chosen in the light of many discussions with my own students throughout the country as to what they would find most useful on tape of this nature. If some of these endings appear elementary, don't be fooled, because many of the pupils in my classes express surprise when I show them some of the positions, and their remarks were simple, dead easy. What's the problem? And then as soon as I set the position down in front of them and asked them to show me the correct technique, they quickly revealed themselves as having absolutely no grasp of the correct ideas whatsoever. So if you absorb what's on this tape, have confidence in your knowledge, have confidence in the fact that these will be endings which actually occur in your games from time to time. The endings which give players most problems and yet are elementary and easy to grasp with just a little effort. And finally, try and enjoy this tape. It's not just another boring endgame lesson, but something useful and highly practical for you, the chess player. On side 1 we'll deal with elementary piece endings. Now it's really amazing how often these endings occur in practice, and equally amazing how often they're blundered away, or how many people I've seen flounder around with no clear idea of how to win a one position or how to draw an equal position. So look at diagram 1 and we'll go straight into the analysis of bishop and knight versus king.
Note: the polish of a master will show it. Diagram 1. White, knight, 7, 24. Black, 4, king, 3, 16. White, king, 5, bishop, 1.
Now this is one of the most elementary of endings, and yet how many of us have bothered to acquire the necessary technique to win it with confidence and ease? Now if you look at diagram 1, the important point to remember is that the enemy king can only be mated in the corner which the bishop controls. The question is, when it's lying in the middle of the board, as it is at the moment, how do we get it there? Let's begin play and try and corner this king. Now in diagram 1, white's pieces are all over the place, and he's got to somehow coordinate his pieces in a concerted attack against the black king to drive it back into the corner. So the first idea, as in most endings where there's no checking sequences, is to bring up the king. So white plays 1, king, b2. Black, for his part, is going to try and obstruct white as best he can, and he will keep his king in the centre for as long as possible and try and make for the wrong corner when the noose is tightening. That means the white squared corner, as we have a black squared bishop. So he plays 1, king to d3. Now how is white going to make progress from this position? Well, he first brings up the knight. So 2, knight c7. Black plays 2, king to c4. And white continues his policy of bringing up the knight. 3, knight to e6. Black attacks the knight. 3, king to d5. White plays 4, knight to d4. And black puts his king back on c4. 4, king c4. Now with 5, king c2, white has accomplished his first aim. He pushes the black king back and establishes a foothold for his own king in the centre. So black is now forced to play his king either to d5 or b4. Doesn't make much difference which way he goes. Let's say he goes to b4. White plays king to d3, and black plays 6, king c5. White continues his policy of cutting squares off from the black king. He plays 7, bishop to h2, and black tries to remain in the centre again with 7, king to d5. White plays 8, knight to b3. Now, I'd like you to turn off your tape recorders at this point and take a look at this position, compare it with diagram 1, and try and see for your own part how you think white has made progress. Did you see how white centralised his knight and king from their distant positions, and suddenly how the black king is slowly being restricted in his choice of squares? In particular, the knight is close to the king, and the bishop operating from long range means that both pieces can't be attacked by the black king, and thus win valuable tempo. So I hope you understand how white's making progress. So let's see how black defends from now on. He's been pushed out of the centre, so he makes for the white squared corner where he can't be mated. So he plays 8, king c6. If he had have played 8, king e6, then king e4 by white would make more significant progress. White takes the opposition with 9, king to c4. Black plays king to b6. And white now moves his knight into c5, knight c5. Black plays king to c6. And now white plays 11, knight to a4. Did you notice the similarities in this position to the position after white's 8th move, with the knight again next to the king and the black king slowly being driven back? We'll go on a bit. Black plays 11, king to b7, again making for the corner. White grabs the opposition, 12, king b5. And now black has no choice. If he goes into a7, then king c6 would corner him still further. So he plays king to c8 on move 12, and white takes the opposition once more with king to c6. Now black really does have no choice. He must play 13, king d8. And white again takes the opposition with 14, king to d6. Black plays 14, king c8. And here, of course, he could go 14, king e8. But then he would be driven over to h8 by either 15, king e6, king f8, 16, bishop e5, or 15, king e6, king to d8, 16, knight to b8, knight to b6, excuse me, and then the black king is driven over to h8 slowly. We'll go back, and the positioning of the pieces is as follows. White has a knight on a4, a king on d6, and a bishop on h2. Black has a king on c8. It's white to move. He plays 15, knight to b6, check. Fifteen, king to b7. 16, king to c5. 16, king to a6 by black. 17, king to c6 by white. Now this is a slightly surprising turn of events, because you may have thought, after the black king had been driven to c8, that white was going to push it along the bat rank to h8 where it would be mated. But in fact, black had enough resources to clamber out onto the a file. But now white tightens the noose with his bishop and knight, and he hopefully will drive the black king down the a file and checkmate it. Now after king c6, what choice does black have? He can go either to a7 or a5, but both variations will ultimately transpose into one another. Now, if he plays king a7 in this position, white simply replies with the bishop move, and then black is forced back to a6. White will then play bishop to b8, and the king is forced up the board to a5 anyway. So let's assume in the initial position, after 17 king c6, that black plays 17 king a5. White replies 18 bishop to d6, and black hand is forced, he must go to a6. White reduces black's options by playing 19 bishop to b8. The king goes to a5, and white plays 20 knight to d5. Now I'd like you to stop your tape recorders once again and try and make the black king on your own from this position. You will have seen that it is not as easy as it looks. I would think that many of you would have reached positions similar to this in your own games, only to let the black king off the hook here and out into the centre again. And so it's from here until the end that you should pay the closest attention. It's fairly easy to drive the black king to the side or to the edge, but then there are a number of quiet moves which you have to make, moves which aren't check or moves which aren't cutting off moves, but moves which restrict the black king to the edge of the board, and knight d5 is one such move. So after this move, black has two choices. He can go back to a6, but this will lead back into the game continuation. So let's assume he tries to make a run for it with 20 king a4. White brings up his king again, 21 king c5, and black continues to make a run for it with 21 king b3. Now perhaps a lot of you are wondering if white hasn't let the black king out here, but please look closely at the next two moves. White plays 22 knight b4. Black thinks he's escaping, he plays his king to c3, and now white plays 23 bishop f4, establishing a cordon around the black king. We now see that the excellent position of the white knight prevents any relief for black at all, and that he's trapped on the back three ranks. In fact, in one corner of the board, if you look at it carefully. The corner of the board, in fact, which white wants, because a1 is a black square and his bishop is black. So we'll go on from here and we'll see how white mates from this position. Black plays 23 king to b3, 24 bishop to e5. Black plays king to a4. White plays 25 king c4. King a5. 26 bishop c7 check, transposing to the other variation. King to a4. 27 knight to d3. King a3. And now comes one of these waiting moves that I was speaking of earlier, and moves which I think the average club player might well miss in handling this ending. Let's have a look at 28 bishop b6. Now it's clear that black can go to a2, but of course he thinks that white's made a mistake, so he goes back to a4. But it becomes clear now exactly how sensible this waiting move was, because it gives white time to manoeuvre his knight and king into more favourable positions. So he plays 29 knight to b2 check. Black has no choice, he must go to a3. And white plays 30 king c3. Now the mate from here is forced, so we'll just look at it quickly. Black has to play to a2. White plays 31 king c2. Black goes back to a3. White plays 32 bishop c5 check. Black has to go to a2. 33 knight d3. And finally we have the black king cornered on a1. He must go there. Now comes another quiet move by white. He plays 34 bishop b4. Now it's really amazing how many times I've seen this type of position come up in 5-minute games, and then the white player who's handling the bishop and knight will suddenly miss this type of quiet move. He won't even consider it, play a careless check, and the black king's out again, and then he has to start all over again. So look closely at this move, bishop b4, and see how helpless black is after it. He must play king to a2, and now white mates in two moves very simply with 35 knight c1 check, king a1, 36 bishop c3 mate. So finally black is mated, and it actually took 36 moves, which is quite a long time. Don't forget that we started for the most unfavourable position from white's point of view, but nevertheless it's only 14 moves short of 50, and that of course will be a draw if white couldn't mate in under 50 moves, so it doesn't leave much scope for error. Now it's worth playing through this analysis again and noting the standard positions after white's 8th, 19th and 22nd moves, and trying your technique out from other random positions in order to get used to the way in which the white pieces cooperate. Right, now we'll go on to the second ending to be discussed, and this is queen against rook.
Diagram 2. 24. Black 2 rook king 4. 8. White 3 king 2 queen 1. 16.
Now again, this has been chosen for practical value. It's an ending which occurs fairly frequently in over the board play, and before we begin I want you to try and win it, assuming you have the queen, starting from the position in diagram 2. Now you'll quickly see, once you've tried it for yourself, that it's not particularly easy. Diagram 2 shows a position which is most favourable for the defender. His rook and king are centralised. If the rook were to stray too far from his king, he would be in danger of being forked or skewered. So white's task now is to prove the superiority of the queen. To do this, he must drive the king to the edge of the board, using both king and queen, and to restrict the mobility of the rook. So play from diagram 2 begins logically, with white giving check on f3. 1 queen f3 check. Now black doesn't want to go back. He must remain in the centre as long as possible to frustrate the white queen and king, so he plays king to e5. White begins to push him back with 2 queen e4. Black plays king to d6, and white moves his king up 3 king d4, which marks significant progress already. Now black really can't move away from that king with his rook. He must play his rook to c6. He's got a couple of alternatives, but as we have remarked before, white's task tends to become easier the further the rook moves away from its king. Just a sample variation to illustrate that. If black had played 3 rook a5, keeping the white king out of the game, then white plays 4 queen to g6 check, king d7, and with 5 queen f6. Completely one of these nothing moves that I was speaking of in the bishop and knight ending. You try and find moves for the black rook other than rook b5. So we'll assume black plays his force move of rook b5. White now wins with 6 queen to f7, king to d6, 7 queen to f8 check, king to d7, and once again 8 queen to f6, wins a tempo on the previous position. Black has to give way with rook a5, and now white plays 9 king c4, king c7, 10 queen e7 check, king to c6, 11 queen e6 check, king to c7, and white finally closes in on the rook and makes progress with 12 king to b4, forcing the rook's retreat. Now what did white achieve in this particular variation? Well, simply he proved that the queen is better than the rook. Compare the position after 3 rook a5 and the position in front of you. Black has simply been cornered in this position. Let's go back. Look at diagram 2 and we'll try again with 1 queen f3 check king e5, 2 queen e4 check king d6, 3 king d4, and instead of rook a5 I'm going to keep the rook near the king by playing 3 rook c6. Now the ideas from the previous variation are not significantly different, but black is defending passively in this case. Nevertheless, white slowly and surely moves in for the kill. Let's see how he does it. He plays 4 queen to e5 check, black plays to d7, and white moves in with the king again, 5 king d5, and black continues to keep his rook next to the king with 5 rook c7. He could have tried to become active, of course, by playing 5 rook to c1, but white would win after 6 queen to f5 check, king e8, 7 queen to h5 check, the king goes back to d7, 8 queen to g4 check, king to e8, and then white plays 9 king to d6, and black's rook has no checks. Now can you see how black was restricted in this example? Now let's go back to the position after 5 rook c7. I'll quickly give you the position of the pieces. Black has a king on d7 and a rook on c7. White has a queen on e5 and a king on d5. So we'll assume black's playing the best defence after 5 rook c7. White goes on moving in. He plays 6 queen e6 check. And now progress is really being made because the black king is forced back to the back rank. King to d8. And now there's a little trap to avoid, because if white plays the obvious king to d6, which I think most of us would want to play on first sight, black has the cheapo rook c6 check, forcing stalemate after king takes c6. Now we don't want that at all, so be careful in this position. We'll play queen to g8 check. Black is playing his king to e7, white gives check on g7, and black plays 8 king to d8 to avoid losing his rook. 9 queen to f8 check, king to d7, all these moves are forced, and now yet again another quiet move, 10 queen f4. You'll now be beginning to understand the significance of these moves a lot more, I think. This puts the onus completely on black to find a move. Now if he plays his rook to b7, white would win easily by playing 11 queen to f7 check, king to c8, closing in with the queen by 12 queen e8 check, king to c7, and after 13 king c5, black is completely run out of moves. So let's reset the position after 10 queen f4, white king on d5, black king on d7, black rook on c7, white queen on f4, and instead of rook b7, black tries to kill time with his king. He plays 10 king to c8. White grabs his chance to move his king in. He plays 11 king to d6. And black continues to run away with king to b8. He could have gone to b7. Let's see what would have happened. White would have played 12 queen to b4 check. Black plays king to c8. And now white plays a very fine move, 13 king to a5. Queen to a5, excuse me. No checks. Nothing fancy, but what can black do? He's threatened with queen a8 mate. His rook's attacked. And if he gives a check on d7, white simply plays king to c6, and that's the end of the game because black's run out of moves. So let's go back to this position. There's a white king on d6, a white queen on f4, a black rook on c7, and a black king on c8. And we'll assume instead of king b7 that black plays king to b8. Now can you see white's move? He plays 12 queen to e5. Black has nothing better than rook to b7. He could have played king c8, but it wouldn't make much difference. He continues to the end of the variation, his policy of keeping his rook next to his king. But now white really closes in and transposes back to the variation we were analysing earlier by playing 13 king to c6 check. Black plays into the corner, 13 king to a8. And now some decisive manoeuvres with the queen. 14 queen a1 check. King to b8. 15 queen to a5, establishing the position of diagram 3. Diagram 3 shows that white has achieved all his aims. The king and queen cooperate beautifully in this position, and black loses his rook in all variations. We'll just look at some of these variations. He can play his rook to h7. White plays queen e5 check, king a8, queen a1 check, king to b8, queen to b1 check, picking up the rook. He could play his rook to b3. White will play 16 queen d8 check, king a7, 17 queen d4 check, king b8, 18 queen f4 check, king a7, 19 queen a4 check, again picking up the rook. He could play his rook to f7. White wins again by 16 queen e5 check, king a7, 17 queen e3 check, king b8, 18 queen b3 check. And his final try is pulling the rook as far away as possible by playing rook b1, but again he loses after white's 16 queen d8 check, king a7, 17 queen d4 check, king a8, 18 queen h8 check, king a7, 19 queen h7 check. Now, seen in its entirety, the process seems pretty easy. There didn't seem much to white shuffling his king and queen up, and black was slowly run out of squares. But of course, over the board, the winning process is another matter. Of course, the most difficult thing to grasp is this quiet move, the deadly move, which appears to be doing nothing, but in fact is inviting the opposition to commit suicide. Play through the analysis again, and study carefully the positions after queen f4 on move 10, queen e5 on move 12, and queen a5 on move 15 by white. If you can appreciate the concepts of restriction of mobility and the necessity to corner the opposition rather than to give a series of aimless checks, you'll have cited the necessary landmarks needed to win this complicated ending. We'll now move on to discussing rook and bishop and rook and knight against rook. In my opinion, too many endgame books dismiss this type of ending as being trivially drawn. but we all know how mortifying it can be to blunder in such positions after hours of tortuous defence, and indeed the defence can be tortuous. The object of this examination is to make the defender's task somewhat lighter, because we'll show the correct techniques to draw from a position which is not too stupid. So look at diagram 4.
Diagram 4, black, 3, king, 4, 8, white, 1, rook, 2, king, 3, 4, bishop, 3, 16, black, 2, rook, 5, 8.
Let's assume that black has been driven to the edge of the board. This is fairly easy to achieve with rook and bishop against rook, and that white is trying hard to press home his advantage of the extra piece. You will see that as long as black's king remains on the same colour square as white's bishop, his rook can always interpose against a rook check on the back rank, and that as long as black has this interpolation, white cannot strengthen his position. We can quickly verify this by the variation 1 rook b8 check, rook c8 by black, 2 bishop f6 check, king to c7, 3 bishop e5 check, king to d8, 4 rook b1, and black simply plays rook to c2, intending after white plays 5 rook g1, trying to mate him on the other side, to simply play 5 king c8, making a break for it and establishing a position which is drawn. Another defensive idea for black can be seen in diagram 5.
Diagram 5, black, 3, king, 4, white, rook, 7, 8, 3, king, 4, 3, bishop, 4, 16, black, 3, rook, 4.
This position arose in a game Floor-Reshevsky from 1937. Black's king's cut off by the white rook on a7, but on the other hand his rook ties down white's bishop, and as long as the pin is maintained, white cannot win. White tried to make progress by playing 1 rook h7, but black replied rook d2, maintaining the pin. And now white tried to move his king in. He played 2 king e5. Black played 2 king c8. Notice not 2 rook e2 check, one of these aimless checks, when white replies 3 king d6. And white plays 3 bishop to c5. Now of course, if rooks come off, the position is a total draw. So black plays 3 rook d7. White interposes bishop by 4 bishop e7, but he couldn't win after king b7, 5 king e6, 5 king c6, 6 rook h1, rook d2 by black. White played 7 rook c1, king b5, 8 bishop d6 check, bishop d6, excuse me, no check. Black plays rook e2 check, 9 king d7, and now black establishes a position after 9 rook d2 where a pin is still in operation, totally tying down the bishop and king of white. So no progress has been made, and the game was agreed drawn shortly. Now if both of these drawing ideas are absorbed, the idea of the rook block or the pin, this ending should not prove difficult for the defender as long as he's careful. But remember that some grandmasters have lost this position by not knowing the drawing techniques. So think carefully about the defence. Now, rook and knight against rook is a slightly different matter, because the king can't be forced to the edge of the board when in the centre with correct play. And it's sufficient for us to consider positions in which the defender is in the most unfavourable position, for example, when he's already there at the edge of the board. Now look at diagram 6.
Diagram 6. Black, 6, king, 1, 8. White, 6, king, 1, 6, knight, 1. Black, 6, rook, 1, 16. White, 5, rook, 2.
You'll see that white's rook, knight and king all occupy menacing positions. But it's difficult to make progress as long as black maintains the pin on the knight. This same motif cropped up in the other ending, but it's one thing to see it in theory, another thing to carry it out in practice. So white's going to make some winning attempts. You're black and you've got to draw this ending. How do you do it? Well, let's assume that white plays his first move, 1 king to f6. Now you should reply here, 1 rook to g2. There are losing chances concealed in this ending. For instance, if you had played 1 king to f8, white would have played knight to e6, check on move 2, king to e8, and then 3 rook d1 would win because of the mate on d8. But you're not going to be fooled by this white trick, and you've played 1 rook g2. White continues to try his winning attempt. He plays 2 knight to e6, but you keep your rook on the g file. You play rook to g3. White plays a tricky move, rook f2, and you play rook to g1. Now another important thing to realise is that you just can't mark time as you like, and when you're defending, keep out of the range of the knight. So rook g1 is undoubtedly the best move, because you could have lost your rook if you'd have played your rook to g4. Let's see how this would have happened. You would have played 3 rook g4, white plays 4 rook a2, threatening rather unpleasant checks on a8 and g5 with the subsequent mate on h8. So don't play rook g4, because then you can't give checks. You play rook g1. Now rook a2 would simply be answered by check on f1. So white tries his final attempt, 4 knight f4. And now black moves to the side in order to give as many checks as possible. He plays rook a1. White plays 5 rook b2. Black plays 5 rook a6 check. Black plays 6 knight e6. And after a quiet king move by black, we see the similarity of the position where the white knight is pinned again. Now this position in front of you in the play from diagram 6 illustrates well black's defensive ideas. Keep the rook as far away as possible from the opposing king and pin the knight. I'd like to go on to discuss pieces and their relation to pawns. Now diagram 7 illustrates an ending of immense practical value.
Diagram 7. White, 3, king, 4, 16. Black, 5, pawn, 2, 4, king, 3, 16. White, rook, 7.
It would be a real shame if you were white in this position and failed to win. And yet, you know, this is precisely what every single person in my chess class at London Central YMCA did when asked to prove that white could win this position. Can you do better? Turn off the tape recorder and try and find out how white wins this ending. I hope it was clear to you that the rook couldn't win on its own, but the question is, can the white king arrive in time to stop the pawn? The technique for you with the rook is simple. You must count. You need to get your king to g2 or e2 if the black king is on the g file. And to get it there, this takes 6 moves, whereas black needs only 5 moves to reach a drawing position with his king on e2 or g2 and the pawn on f2. We can conclude from this that white wins only if he has the move. So therefore, in diagram 7, white plays his first move, king e7. Now if it were black to move, he draws by 1 f4, 2 king e7, f3, 3 king f6, f2, black's gaily pushing his pawn, white plays 4 king g5, king e3, 5 king g4, king e2, and black establishes a drawing position. Now with white to move, this is very different, and as we've seen, he plays king e7. So black has nothing better than to push his pawn. You might as well try and queen it. So he plays 1 f4. White plays 2 king f6. Black plays f3. White plays 3 king g5. The significant point of all this, of course, is he's not moving his rook. He's getting his king to where the action is. Black plays 3 f2. White continues to move his king, king g4. And we find he's just in time to stop the pawn. Black plays 4 king e3, white plays 5 king g3, black plays king e2, and white plays 6 king g2, winning. Now that looks very simple, doesn't it? But it was absolutely incredible how many useless rook checks were given by my students, losing important tempi. White only had to move his king to win this position. Let's go back to diagram 7 again, except we'll put white's king on c7 this time instead of d8. Let's count again. Now in order for the white king to reach g2, he only requires 5 moves, king d6, e5, f4, g3 to g2. And yet the position is a draw. The reason for this is that the black king is more favourably posted with regard to the white king, and he can force white to waste time. We'll see how he does this. Assuming it's white to move, white will try and bring his king up as in the previous example. He plays 1 king d6 and black pushes his pawn with f4. Now whereas in the previous example white played his king to f6 in this position, he can't do so here, so king e6 doesn't suffice. So what he tries to do is to check with his rook to drive the black king to an unfavourable position. He plays 2 rook a4 check. If he had have played king e6, black would have played f3. If he had have played king c5 on move 2, black again plays f3. Finally, rook e1 check on move 2 is no good. Black plays king to d3 and follows up with a quick f3, f2 when white is not in time with his king. So he's played 2 rook a4 check, and black comes in with his king to support the pawn's advance. He plays 2 king e3. White plays 3 king e5. Black plays 3 f3. White gives one more check on a3. King e2. 5 king e4 by white. It may look as though he's getting back, but no, black's got a little trick up his sleeve at the end. He plays f2. 6 rook a2 check by white, king e1 by black, and now white plays his 50%er. He plays his king to e3. tempting black to queen his pawn. But of course black doesn't queen his pawn, he knights his pawn with check in this position, after which the position's a dead draw. So by that little trick, black escapes. So we can see that putting the king on c7 in the initial position doesn't help white at all. He could have played it in a different way. He could have initially given a check on e1. Let's try that. So we'll look at the position. White's rook's on a1, his king's on c7. Black has a pawn on f5 and a king on e4. And we're suggesting that white plays rook e1 check. Black plays king d4. White attacks the pawn. Rook f1. King e4 again. 3 king to d6. Now the difference in this variation is that white has his rook on f1 instead of a1. But it makes no difference to the result. The position is still drawn. Black draws by quickly advancing his pawn. He plays f4. White plays 4 king e6. Black plays 4 f3. King f6 by white. King e3. 6 king g5. f2. And on the next turn black plays king to e2 and draws. Now the difference of the king position meant so much, didn't it? We'll look at it one more time from diagram 7, but put the white king this time on c6. Now white wins, because he has one more tempi. He can play in the initial position 1 king to c5. Black pushes his pawn, f4. White plays 2 king to c4. Black plays king e3. He could have played 2 f3, but then white will win by playing 3 rook e1 check and 4 king d3. So back at the position with the white king on c4, a white rook on a1, a black pawn on f4, and a black king on e3. White plays 3 king to c3. Black continues to move his king in. He plays king e2. And now white wins by playing 4 king to d4. Black advances with f3. And white plays 5 rook a2 check and follows it up by king e3. In other words, he gets his king near to the pawn at the crucial moment. Final position I want to examine from diagram 7 is with white rook on d1, white king on d8, black king on e4, black pawn on f5. Now what do you think the difference is between this position and the others? If it were white to move, let's try his strategy of bringing up the king again. The normal sequence goes 1 king e7, f4, 2 king f6, f3, 3 king g5, f2, 4 king g4, king e3, 5 king g3, and then black gains an all-important tempo by playing king e2, drawing. So the difference was that by gaining a tempo on the rook, black could draw if white continued to blindly bring up his king. Nevertheless, the position is a win for white, and in the light of the previous examples, I'd like you to turn off your tape recorders and see if you can find the technique to win. Did you find 1 rook e1 check? Well, don't be too disappointed if you didn't, because it's rather subtle why white needs to give this check. He has to improve the position of his rook to guard against this king e2 move gaining a tempo. And let's see how this does so. So if the black king goes to the d file, as we've seen, white wins by a tempo. So he has no choice, he must go to the f-file. So he plays his king to f3. Now white checks again on f1, significantly, and black protects his pawn by playing king to g4. But now the white king is onside. He plays king e7. Black tries to advance his pawn, but white is just in time to stop it. 3 f4 by black, 4 king e6, f3 by black, king e5, king g3, 6 king e4, f2, 7 king e3, king g2, and I'll leave you to work out the final move by white yourselves. Don't think it. The thing to notice in most of these examples was how the white king managed to outstrip the black king in the race to g2, and that the white rook very rarely made moves. Let's go on to diagram 8, which illustrates a significant white technique in endings of this nature.
Diagram 8. White, king 7, rook 7, black 5 king 2, 6 pawn 1, 32.
With the white pieces stranded on a8 and a7, it's surprising that he can win, but so long as he has the move, he can do so by playing 1 rook a5. He profits from the fact that the black king is cut off, and the black pawn cannot advance to the 6th rank. We'll quickly see why. Black tries to advance his pawn as quickly as possible after rook a5. He plays g4, 2 king b7, g3, and white plays 3 rook a3, winning the pawn, because black can't support it with his king, and if he advances g2, white plays 4 rook g3, winning the pawn. So, being unable to push the pawn, he must support the pawn with his king. So he tries to bring his king round the other side of the pawn to support the advance. Unfortunately, this gives white sufficient tempi to bring his king in, and white wins as follows. 1 rook a5, black plays 1 king g6, and now white begins his king march. He plays king b7. Black plays king h5, white plays 3 king c6, and now, because of the pin, black must move his king once more. He plays king to g4, white plays 4 king d5, black plays king f3, white plays 5 king e5, and finally black is able to advance his pawn. He plays g4, but it's not quick enough because white plays 6 rook a3 check. The black king moves to f2, and simply king f4 picks off the pawn. It's amazing how much progress white has made from the initial position, but what progress did black make? And why did this happen? This happened because 1 rook a5 was such a powerful move, and it slowed black's game down to such an extent as to make this position in front of you possible. Remember this idea of cutting off the king. It might happen in one of your own games, and it's extremely important. Finally, in this short discussion, I want to go on to diagram 9.
Diagram 9, 16, white 1 king pawn 5, black 3 rook 4, 24, king 7.
Now this has been included just to show you that there is justice in the world, and that sometimes the superior force doesn't win. It's white to move in this position, and let's see what he plays. He plays 1 c7. Now, we've seen in the previous examples how the rook easily stopped the pawn, but in this particular position it's not easy to stop the pawn at all. He can't defend with rook d8, he can't play rook c5. So what he must do is hope to give perpetual check. So he plays rook to d6 check. White plays 2 king b5. He doesn't play king b7, which would allow rook to d7, drawing. Black can't stop the pawn with his rook. He gives a check on d4 and d5, and white plays his king 3 king b4. Black must continue checking. He plays rook d4 check. White plays 4 king b3. Black plays 4 rook d3 check, and white finally plays king c2. Now what do you think's happening in this position? It's a bit unclear, isn't it? Can black stop the pawn with his rook? Well, you'll quickly see that he can't, so what he must do is set up some tricks. He plays 5 rook d4. Now, if white gaily goes on queening his pawn and puts a queen on c8, black plays the horrible rook c4 check, forking king and queen. White plays 7 queen takes c4, and it's stalemate. But what white does do amazingly, he plays c8 equals rook. Now just look at this position. White is threatening rook to a8 mate. Black has no useful checks, so he must play his rook on d4 to a4. But now justice is served, because white plays 7 king b3, attacking the rook, and threatens mate simultaneously on c1. Therefore, white wins. So it's just as well to be aware of the balance. Sometimes the pawn does win. The only thing I can say, finally, is that if you get this ending in your games of rook against pawn, stop, think, and try and remember the ideas concealed in the previous positions. You have to get your king working as quickly as possible, whether you have the rook or the pawn, doesn't matter. Don't give aimless checks if you have the rook, because they might lose tempo, and accuracy is of the utmost importance in endings of this nature. And above all, don't become overconfident and think you can analyse everything out over the board and play too quickly. This is precisely what my students did in the class. Having seen the analysis of diagrams 7 to 8, I don't think you'll be repeating their errors. We move on now to discuss queen against pawn on the 7th rank. At first sight, this may seem strange to examine endings with such material disparity, as the queen usually wins easily. However, complications do arise when the pawn reaches the 7th rank, and the defender often has some tricks up his sleeve, which we do well to avoid if we are aware of them. So we'll begin with diagram 10.
Diagram 10, white, king, 6, queen, 40, black, 3, pawn, king, 3, 8.
White has a king on a8, a queen on h8, and black has a king on e2 and a pawn on d2. Now, it's white to move. Black is threatening d1 equals queen. And this is the easiest possible example of queen and pawn against queen against pawn, White wins by forcing the black king onto the square in front of his pawn and then slowly brings up the king. We'll quickly verify this. White plays 1 queen b2, pinning the pawn. Black plays 1 king e1. White plays 2 queen b4. Black plays king e2. White plays 3 queen e4 check. King f2. 4 queen d3. Black has to protect with 4 king e1. White checks on e3. Black plays king d1. And now white brings up his king. 6 king b7. Now we'll quickly show you how white makes further progress. He plays, after black plays 6 king c2, white plays queen e2, pinning once more, and we get the same series of queen moves leading to a king move by white. Black plays 7 king c1, 8 queen c4 check, king b2, queen d3, king c1, and again white forces the king in front of the pawn by 10, queen c3 check, king d1, and 11, king c6. It's pointless to go on with this process. You'll see for yourself how white's doing all this. So with the centre pawn, it's a gradual but inexorable process. Play through this example again, but I don't envisage any real problems. Now look at diagram 11.
Diagram 11, white, king, 5, queen, 1, 40, black, pawn, king, 6, 8.
The position's different completely. In this particular position, black has an A pawn, a rook's pawn, and this makes white's task a lot more complicated. It's clear that white can use the same method as we used against the centre pawn against the knight's pawn. But what about this rook's pawn? Let's try and bring the queen in. Queen g2 check on move 1. Black plays king to b1. Queen f1 check. King b2. 3 queen b5 check. King c2. 4 queen a4 check. King b2. 5 queen b4 check. King c2. 6 queen a3 attacking the pawn. Black plays 6 king b1. 7 queen b3 check. King a1 by black. And now we see the significant difference. It's stalemate. White can't move his king up or get his queen to c1 to give checkmate. If he moves his queen off the b file, black simply replies king b1. So you'll appreciate the difference. Reposition the pieces as in diagram 11, but now put the white king on d5. Look at the difference this time. White plays his queen in again. He plays 1 queen g2 check. Black tries to defend in the same method as with the same method as the last diagram, king b1. But now white has a tremendous trick up his sleeve. He plays 2 king c4, allowing black to queen in broad daylight. We'll assume that black queens. He has no other constructive move. Now white plays 3 king b3. Everything becomes clear. Mate is threatened on c2 or f1. Black has no checks with the queen, therefore he loses. Go back to diagram 11 and put the white king on e4. The win is now achieved in a different fashion, but nevertheless instructive. Once again, white plays 1 queen g2 check. Black plays king b1, and again white moves his king in, allowing black to queen in broad daylight. He plays 2 king d3. Black queens, and now he's mated on c2. He plays 3, white plays 3, queen c2 check. What can we deduce from these examples? Well, simply that the white king must be within 3 squares of b3 to make an impact, and that if it is not, the game is drawn. White was able to win these examples simply because the mobility of the black queen was so severely restricted on a1 that it couldn't come to the aid of the defence of its king. We'll finally move on to queen against bishop's pawn. What's the difference this time? Well, this can be summed up in one word: stalemate. Diagram 12 illustrates very clearly the problem for white.
Diagram 12, white, king, 5, queen, 1, 40, black, 2, pawn, king, 4, 8.
We can see that the black pawn is threatening all the time to advance, so white tries these pinning tricks in the hope that he can bring up his king. With the bishop's pawn, however, the situation is different. Let's try. White plays 1 queen a2, black plays king d1, white plays 2 queen a4, pinning the pawn once more, king d2, white plays 3 queen d4 check. Black plays king e2. If he had have played king c1, then white would bring up his king with king b7. White plays 4 queen c3. King goes to d1. White plays queen d3 check, forcing the king in front of the pawn. 5 king c1, and now white attempts to bring up his king with 6 king b7. But now black has some tricks. He plays 6 king b2. White pins again with 7 queen d2. You'll have appreciated the significance of these pinning ideas. 7 king to b1. White checks on b4. King to a2. 9 queen to c3. Black defends with king b1. 10 queen b3. Obviously expecting black to protect his pawn with 10 king c1, after which white continues with king c6. But no, in this position black plays 10 king to a1. Now this is the sort of trick which he has available to him in this ending. Therefore, if the queen takes the pawn on c2, it's stalemate. If he doesn't, black's threatening to advance to c1. So he's making no progress. We can see then that this ending is drawn unless the white king is in range, and the b3 square once again holds the key. Go back to diagram 12 and put the white king, as in the previous example, on d5. It can quickly be illustrated that this makes a significant difference, because white plays, instead of queen g2 check, 1 queen g5 check. Black plays king d1. White plays queen g1 check. Don't worry about the checks, it's the position of the king which is going to matter. Black plays king d2. White plays queen d4 check. Black plays king e2. King c1 would, of course, force the advance of the white king. White attacks the pawn on c2 with 4 queen c3. Black plays king d1. White plays 5 queen d3 check. Black plays king c1. And now white, having forced this favourable position, brings in his king. 6 king c4. Now you see the significant difference here. If the king were on a8, king b7 would have no force. Here king c4 has terrific force, because black is forced to reply with king b2. White continues to pin with 7 queen d2, not of course 7 queen e2 when black plays king b1, and if white closes in with king b3, then c1 equals knight check, picks off the queen, and black is even a piece up at the end of this game. But no, he plays queen d2. Black unpins with king b1, and white plays the significant move king b3 again. And we can quickly see that if black queen's on c1, queen a2 is mate. So we've exhausted this ending now of queen against pawn on the 7th rank. But please, when you go over the analysis, think carefully about the resources available to both sides. In particular, for the defensive side, stalemate. Of course, if you're the person with the queen, always be looking out for these things. The final ending to be examined on this tape is that of knight against pawn. The knight is probably the trickiest piece available to the chess player, and yet, against a solitary pawn, it is often helpless. And the nearer the pawn is to the edge of the board, the worse the knight becomes. For example, look at diagram 13.
Diagram 13, 8, mixed pieces, white pawn, 1, black knight, 5, 8. White, 3, king, 4, 8. Black,
6, king 1, 16.
This is a very simple example. Let's imagine that it's white to move. He plays 1 king c6, attacking the knight. Black plays his knight into the corner, and 2 king b7 picks up the knight, and thereafter queens the pawn. This was a very simple example, but it might help you when you look at diagram 14.
Diagram 14, 16, white 7, pawn, mixed 4, white king 1, black knight 1, 16, black 2, king 5, 8.
Now this is a more complicated example, but once again we can see how difficult it will be for the knight to stop the pawn. However, in this example he manages to do it. White attacks the knight initially to try and force the advance of his pawn by playing 1 king f5, and now black must play his knight back to h7. If he played it to f7, white would simply advance his pawn. Any other move is absolutely ludicrous. So he plays 1 knight h7, and white plays 2 king g6, attacking the knight. Knight f8 check by black, and white attacks the knight by playing 3 king g7. 3 king f7 would lead to a repetition of position after black played knight h7. After 3 king g7, black can give a check on e6, and it is with this manoeuvre that he draws this position, because if white now plays to g6, knight f8 repeats the position. If he plays to f6, knight f8 again repeats the position, because white cannot force an advance of the pawn. And if he plays to f7, the only other square, black plays 4 knight to g5 check, 5 king to g6, and simply plays 5 knight to e6, drawing after 6 h7, knight f8 check, and knight takes h7 on the next move. Now of course white could try a few things, but it leads to nothing more than going around the mulberry bush. Once black has found this circuit for his knight, he draws this position. Try and bear the ideas in mind in this position when we go on to diagram 15. Now this is a study by Grigoriev, and it illustrates what resources are available to the defender in an apparently hopeless position.
Diagram 15, 16, mixed, white king 6, black pawn, 16, black 4, king 3, white knight 7, 8.
In practical play, you'll generally come across positions of knight against pawn in which the knight is a long way away. So exact analysis of this position and a knowledge of the drawing technique from diagram 14 is very useful to you. What can white play in diagram 15? An initial examination of the position reveals that white's game is almost hopeless. If he tries the natural 1 knight c3, he loses in straightforward fashion to an advance of the pawn by black, 1 h5, 2 knight d5 check, and black plays king to f3, which deserves an exclamation mark. The attacker's king is always best in diagonal opposition to the knight, where it's out of checking range for 3 moves. Therefore, this is why king f3 is so strong. White continues to try and stop this pawn by playing knight to c7. Black plays h4. White plays 4 knight e6, hoping for 4h3 knight g5 check. But once again, black takes the diagonal position by playing 4 king g4. This completely frustrates the attempt by the white knight to stop the pawn, and after 5 knight c5, h3, 6 knight e4, h2, 7 knight f2 check, king f3, we get the same sort of ideas that you saw in diagram 13, where the white knight is trapped in the corner and is lost. So that's not good enough for white. Go back to the initial position of diagram 15. Now we'll try the very subtle knight b4. It turns out this is the only move, but you must admit it's a little bit surprising. To understand why, remember the motifs of diagram 14. Play continues. 1 h5. White plays 2 knight c6, and black again takes the diagonal position. He doesn't advance his pawn. If he advanced his pawn, white plays 3 knight e5. So he takes the diagonal position with 2 king e4. Now what difference does this make, you're asking to yourselves? Well, it's only because white has a pretty amazing move up his sleeve that it does make a difference. He plays 3 knight a5. Now, this bizarre move can only be understood in the context of the critical squares f1 and g4. f1 and g4 mean so much because it is an analogous defence to diagram 14. From c4, where the knight's aiming for at the moment, the knight is excellently placed for reaching either of these squares. So let's continue. After knight a5, black thinks to himself, well, this is a stupid move, he's joking with me. He pushes his pawn, plays 3 h4. And now white plays his knight, 4 knight c4. Now it becomes clear the point of white's manoeuvre. If black advances his pawn with 4 h3, white plays 4 knight to d2 check, king to d3, and 6 knight to f1, with a defence along the lines of diagram 14, where he oscillates his knight between h2, g4 and f1, and the black king can't prevent this. So black doesn't allow this. He doesn't play h3. So let's go back to the position where white has a knight on c4, black has a king on e4, black has a pawn on h4, and white has a king on a6, stranded away from the action. So black plays king f3 instead of h3, and white gives a check on e5, knight e5 check. Now it can be seen that accuracy is still required in this position. Notice that after 5 knight d2 check, king e2, 6 knight e4, h3, 7 knight g3 check, black plays 7 king f2 with a win, because the knight is stranded after 8 knight e4, king g2, unable to stop the pawn. Let's go back a bit to the point at which white plays his knight to e5 check. In this position, white has knight on e5, his king's on a6, his pawn's on h4, and the king is on f3. After knight e5 check, black plays king to g3, and white plays knight to c4, black advances with h3, and after 7 knight e3 by white, we have reached the drawing position of diagram 14, which by now should be familiar to you. Obviously this is complex, but again it's surprising how often this ending turns up in practical play. The techniques in diagram 14 are difficult, but they are very rewarding to master, and they'll also save many a game which appears to be hopeless. As a postscript to the main body of work, I like to finally consider this ending. Look at diagram 16, and before going any further, I just want you to assess this position.
Diagram 16, black 5, king 2, 24, white 5, pawn 2, 5, king 2.
I showed this position to my class in the YMCA, and I asked them the same question, and very few of them were able to assess it correctly. They hummed and hawed between win, draw, loss. They didn't know what to say. But before you go on, take a look at it and see what you think. How many of you assess this as a win for white? Well, with black to move, first of all, it's fairly obviously a draw. He plays 1 king f5 and 2 king f4, and white cannot win. But how many of you thought that white wins with best play if he's on move? In fact, the position is a draw. But what do you play as black after 1 king e2? If you chose 1 king e6, well done. You chose better than virtually everybody in the class. You can draw after 2 king e3, king e5, or 2 king f3, king f5, in both cases gaining the opposition. King e6 was such a good move because it enabled black to maintain the distant opposition, so that when white came closer and tried to force black back, he was able to place his king squarely in front of white and bar any progress. This idea will crop up many times in your own games, and you'll do well to memorise this position and the possible variations. Well, we've come to the end of this practical endgames tape. It's by no means exhaustive, and I hope there will be more tapes in this series, particularly if this one proves popular. Please send your criticisms, ideas and suggestions for the next tape to Audio Chess, and in particular what you would like to see included. In the final analysis, I hope this has stimulated you a little bit into thinking about endgames, because there's such a rich field of chess art.